Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dennis Brown, and this is my weekly Freight Broker Bootcamp live training. But today I'm doing kind of a special episode. This is going to be what I call an Ask Me Anything live Q&A. So we're not going to be doing a specific training, but what I am going to do is hit me up in the comments with the city and state you're logging in from. Okay. And I will give you some shout outs, and then we're going to jump into Q&A, but you need to hold your questions until I say go, right? Otherwise they're going to get lost in the feed and I'm never going to see your questions. All right. Remember, we're streaming this on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. So we get a lot of comments, a lot of people. Thank you for joining me. If you're catching this on replay, hit me in the comments with hashtag replay. I love to hear from my replay folks. And so that's what we're doing today. Ask me anything, but hold your questions. I don't care if it's about how to get shippers or how to find carriers or how to do rates or how to become a freight agent or, how to get your freight broker bond or what is a CRM or what is a TMS or any of those questions, anything related, anything about load boards, whatever it is, I'm going to do my absolute best to try to answer those questions for you today. But for now, give me a quick shout out in the comments and I'll get back to you with a shout out. Let's see. I got to do something here real quick. Sorry. All right. So Cynthia from Maryland, welcome. Jason from Minnesota, welcome. Brian from Independence, Oregon, I should say. Renee from Rochester. Aram from, I'm not sure. He didn't hit it up. So somebody from Chicago whose name I can't read. Chandra from North Carolina, Scott Ramo from Plymouth Meeting, PA. Awesome. Cool. So again, hit me up in the comments with the city and state you're logging in from. I'll give you a quick shout out. Carrie from New Mexico. And then what we will do is we will jump into the live Q&A. So again, I'm not going to do a training on a specific topic, but I am going to spend about 30 minutes on any of your questions. So if this is your first Freight Broker Bootcamp Live and you've got a question, you can feel free to to join in. If you're already a part of my Freight Broker Bootcamp startup program, my Freight Broker Bootcamp online startup program, I've trained over 10,000 students. You can also ask questions here. So so that's where we're at, guys. I'm excited. We're going to do a Ask Me Anything. We got Aram from Armenia. Awesome. Corey from Billings, as usual. Dolores from Atlanta, Charlie from New York, and El Ajmurat from Chicago. Awesome. First time live. Good. I hope you have questions. Hold your questions for just a minute or two until we get a bunch of people live, and then we're going to dive right in. Okay. So I hope you guys have good questions today. All right. Questions about freight broker startup or freight broker sales or freight broker cold calling or anything related to starting or growing a successful freight broker business. Okay. That's what we're doing today. Angela from upstate South Carolina. Love it. Perfect. So most of the people are either tuning in from YouTube or LinkedIn, it appears. YouTube, probably the most. That's good feedback. All right, good. All right, so less than 1 minute and we're going to start the Q&A. Hold your questions until I say go, and then I will take your questions as they come in. Now, here's the rules for the Ask Me Anything. Lauren from Canada, awesome. Thank you for joining me. Here's the rules. You have to give me a specific question. I can't answer a question, how do I get shippers? Okay? Way too broad. Okay? So you got to be specific with your question. Be descriptive in your question. Okay? So make sure you ask me the real question that you're looking the answer for, right? Not a generic question like, how do I become a freight broker? Right? A little bit too generic unless you're just really getting started, and I can kind of point you in the direction there, but be specific with your questions. Otherwise, it's very hard for me because I can't ask you a follow-up question on what you mean through the chat, right? It's just very time consuming, very difficult to do that. So please be very specific with your questions. I will do my absolute best to answer any and all questions you have. Okay. That If I don't know the answer, believe it or not, sometimes that's the case, or I don't have any experience specific with that scenario, I'm going to try to point you in the right direction. Okay. So that's what I do. All right. So here we go, guys. Sean, yes. How about those Bills? Yes, they did win. Big game, right? They beat San Fran? So yeah, well, fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. All right. So without further ado, today I'm doing what I call a Freight Broker Ask Me Anything session. That means this is a live Q&A where you can ask me any questions. And I mean any questions about starting or growing a successful freight brokerage. For example, hey, Dennis, how do I get shippers? Hey, Dennis, how do I find carriers? Hey, Dennis, what CRM do you recommend? Hey, how do I get my freight broker bond? Anything related to freight broker technology, freight broker sales, freight broker startup, rating, quoting, any of those topics, anything about starting or growing a successful freight brokerage is up for grabs. And all you got to do is ask your questions. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to type your questions into the chat box, and we're going to take them in order, right? And I'm going to spend about 30 minutes here trying to answer all your questions. I don't know who's going to be first, who's going to be the first guinea pig to ask the first question and break the ice. And then we'll get the ball rolling. So I'm waiting for you guys to start asking questions. Hit me up in the comments, no matter where you're at. Noah, welcome from North Carolina. Okay, here we go. Jonathan asks, what's a good laptop starting out a freight brokerage? All right, so here's the key. Don't break the bank, okay? Don't break the bank on buying a computer. You want to buy a laptop, you don't need to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on a laptop. You can probably spend $500 on a laptop and get something that's more than sufficient for what you need. The most important part about your computer when it comes to being a freight broker is your internet connection. Okay, because you are going to be doing things like integrating with different software through the internet. So, your CRM, your TMS, your load boards, those are all web-based. Those are all internet-based. So your internet speed is much more important than the CPU of your computer. Now, you're not going to want to buy something that's 5 years old, right, and used and refurbished. You're probably going to want to buy something that's modern, but you don't need to spend $2,000 or break the bank. I think that a reasonable computer, whether that be an HP or any number of the good brands out there, you should be able to get a very good computer for somewhere between probably $400 and $800 for your startup, which means you don't need to break the bank. That's the key. I don't have a specific brand. I like HP. I've used a bunch of different brands. A lot of it's going to depend on whether you're going to be doing, Windows or you're going to be doing Mac, of course. I use a combination of the two, but I have kind of migrated to Mac. Macs have a tendency to be a little bit more expensive, but in the long run, they usually last a little bit longer, less problems. So that's up to you. So that's my answer. Hope that helps. Andreas Garcia asks, customers with high volume, but really low profit, $100 approximately, 8 to 15 loads per week, some loads hard to cover. It's a customer you want to have. Okay, so your question is, high volume, low margin customers, are they worth the time and energy? Are they worth the hassle? And the answer is, it depends. Let me explain to you what I mean. Making $100 on a load that takes you 5 minutes to cover might be worthwhile. But moving a load that you're making $100 on, where you got to make 50 phone calls and spend an hour or 2 or 3 just to cover that load, is probably not worth your time. So there is no one size fits all answer to this. But if they can provide you consistent volume and you are able to cover the loads relatively easy, making even 50 or $100 a load, I try to keep it minimum $100 a load, can be very valuable, right? It can be extremely valuable. If you've got 10 loads a week at $100, profit a load, that's $1,000. So a lot of it's going to depend upon the amount of time and energy and resources that it takes to cover those loads. The other thing that you're going to want to look at is how quickly do they pay you, right? So you always have to factor in how quickly do they pay you. If they're going to take 90 days and you're making $100 a load, you might not want to tie up all that cash paying carriers, and you might want to invest that cash that you're paying carriers into higher margin freight. That's just something you need to look at. Most shippers should probably pay you somewhere in the range of 30 to 45 days. 45 days probably being the average, particularly if you are the squeaky wheel. So I hope that helps. Good question. Thank you. T. Landy, give me a more specific question. Establishing credit. Okay. I mean, be more specific if you can, and I'll come back to you. Renee, I'm an agent struggling to get shippers, trying several things to be different. Any tips on how to be different than everybody else? Okay, so I love the question because you're focused on being different. That tells me you've watched some of my other freight broker sales training, some of my other cold call training, some of my other lives, okay? So Renee, the key to being different is to get away from the old school cold calling scripts. Now I'm going to share 3 of them with you that I absolutely hate. And if any of you are using these scripts, you absolutely have to figure out a way to get away from them and start figuring out a more compelling sales hook, right? The one script that I hear all the time is, hey, we've got trucks in your area, and I thought I might be able to quote on some of your loads or help you move some of your freight. And they've heard it hundreds of times. And what it does is it automatically triggers a negative response. All right. So that's number 1. Number 2, hey, we've got a network of 10,000 trucks, and I thought I might be able to help you with some of your freight. And they've heard it a million times. You got to be different. So get rid of that. The other one is, hey, I'm a freight broker. I thought we might be able to save you some money on your freight. And again, they've heard it. And not only that, but you're painting yourself into a corner where you have to be the cheapest in order to get the business, which is never a good proposition. Okay. So first of all, get rid of those 3 primary scripts. All right. Those are kind of the short version of those scripts. If you have any version of those, you need to move away from them. What you need to do is you need to gather sales intelligence on the industry that you're involved with, the niche, the company that you're prospecting, and the actual shipping and logistics manager. Gather sales intelligence before you make the call. 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, gather some information, and then customize your approach based upon that sales intelligence that you've gathered. I am a big believer in quality over quantity. I'm never the guy that tells you that you have to make 100 or 150 or 200 dials a day in order to get shippers. Because the fact is, Renee, if you and I were sitting down at a desk, just based on what I know about you, a little bit that I know about you, if we had the exact same 100 leads and you called the 100 and I called the 100, okay, our results would be vastly different. Why? It's quality over quantity. We could even use the same script, but the fact is that if you take a kind of a generic approach, right? And I know you said you're trying to customize it and be different, which is great. A perfect example of being a little bit different is just understanding the pain points and the needs associated with your niche, and then creating a compelling sales opening, like a cold call opening. The hardest part about cold calling is getting your prospect's attention. That's the first 3, 5, 10 seconds of your call, because if they've heard what you're saying too many times before, or you sound generic or you sound like a salesperson, you're going to automatically trigger that negative response. And they're going to say, we're not interested. We don't use brokers. Call me back later. I don't have time, right? You're going to get those classic rebuttals. So if you sound a little bit different, right? And you stop trying to sound like a polished salesperson and you start sounding like a human, what you're going to find is you're going to get a lot more engagement in those first 15 seconds, which lead to a 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5-minute call where you can qualify them, that you can build some rapport, you can schedule a follow-up call, and maybe even do some freight quotes. So I hope that helps. That's the short version. The long version is, and I'm just going to put this in here now, if you guys are struggling to get shippers, okay, and you need help getting shippers, you're struggling with freight broker sales, check out my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program. It's my 8-week live coaching program, coaching and mentoring program, where I take that piece of my brain, I transplant it into your head, and I teach you everything I know about freight broker sales, my best freight broker sales strategies, tactics, and tools that allowed me to do over $200 million as a freight broker. And that's the wait list. Now, it's closed right now. It's sold out right now. But if you get on the wait list, you'll be the first to get notified. All the details are there about the program. And I would highly recommend you guys get on the wait list. If you're struggling to get shippers and you've gotten to this point where you're an agent or a broker, you've got to start getting some positive cash flow. And this program was designed to help you get your first 5 to 10 shippers and on your way to 7 figures. So check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. All right. Good question so far, guys. Carrie asks, I am having trouble studying the program. It's a lot of information, so you have a better way to study and get a hang of it. Also, would it be better off to start as an agent with a bigger company before I go rogue and start a brokerage and put agents under me? Okay, so I'm going to answer the second part first. If you don't have a lot of experience as a freight broker, so I'm going to give you the answer to the question of, should I start as an agent before I go out on my own as a broker? If you don't have a significant amount of experience in logistics or trucking or transportation, and or you don't have the capital necessary to get your bond and your authority and all those pieces, right? Then I highly recommend you start as a freight agent. Freight agent has all the upside of a freight broker with little or no downside. First of all, you don't have to get your broker authority. You don't have to get your bond. You don't have to get insurance. You don't have to pay carriers. You don't have to worry about factoring. You don't have to worry about any of that. So your job is much smaller. Your focus as a freight agent is finding and serving shippers in your niche. And you can get paid 50 to 70% of the profit on any given load. So if a load makes $200, right? You pay a shipper pays you $1,000, you pay a carrier $800, and there's $200 in profit, and you're getting 50 to 70% of that. That means you're getting between $100 and $140 commission on that one load. Now imagine doing one of those a day or doing 5 of those a day and how that starts to add up. So it's a lot easier to be an agent than it is a broker. Plus, you'll be able to build your book of business. And then who knows, maybe a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years down the road, you want to launch your own brokerage. Well, you'd always have that option, and it's going to be a lot easier because you already know the ropes and you already have a book of business. So I hope that helps. Oh, first part, as far as the information in Freight Broker Bootcamp, right? The Freight Broker Bootcamp online startup program is a combination. Obviously, there's a bunch of articles and written material. There's also videos. I would strongly suggest that you focus on the quick start video, right? Focus on the quick start video and start following those steps there. And then from there, obviously, you can pick the different lessons or the different modules that you want to go over in the actual course itself. Some of them are obviously more important than others. You're going to want to learn about how to find trucks. You're going to want to learn how to do rating. You're going to want to learn that. A lot of that stuff is very, very important. And so you can specifically gear towards that with the Freight Broker Bootcamp startup program, right? And if you have questions and you're a student of Freight Broker Bootcamp, if you're already part of the online training program, just send an email to support@freightbrokerbootcamp.com, and we will do our absolute best to try to answer those questions or point you in the right direction to where you can get those answers inside the course. So I hope that helps. Excuse me. All right, give me a minute. Charlie asks, how can I come up with fair rates for drivers using the ongoing rate? When can we get that information from? Where? Okay, this is for flatbed RGNs. Okay, Charlie, here's the key to rating and quoting for shippers, okay? Your client is a shipper, manufacturer, producer. Let's say they do steel. You said flatbed. So let's say they manufacture, import, export, extrude, do steel, some sort of steel products, and you want flatbeds. And they give you a lane from Buffalo to Atlanta for flatbeds, just a hypothetical. In order for you to quote that lane, what you're going to want to do is you need to understand what is the spot market that it's going to cost you to buy a flatbed truck, a 53-foot flatbed from Buffalo to Atlanta. So the best way to do that is very simple. As a startup, you're going to go to the load boards like the DAT and Truck Stop and Direct Freight, different load boards that are out there. Number one, you're going to want to post that load, and you're going to start taking calls from carriers. And those calls are going to gather some sales intelligence, some market intelligence, some rate intelligence on what the cost from Buffalo to Atlanta is for a flatbed. Now, the thing you don't want to do is when they call, you don't want to ask them how much they're willing to pay. You want to negotiate, okay? So you're going to probably use maybe some rating tools like maybe the Internet Truck Stop rating tools or the DAT rating tools or other rating tools as a baseline, and you're going to want to start out very low. And this is the reality. You have to find the market. You have to, that's what you have to do. You have to find what is the spot market rate to pay a truck today. Okay. Now it's not going to fluctuate a lot tomorrow or within a week, but it could fluctuate over a period of time. So understanding that spot market, let's say, for example, you were able to buy a truck for $1,500. Okay. That's what it's going to cost you. You talk to, and then you're also going to want to call people off that load board. You're also going to want to look at lane history and things like that. So you're going to want to talk to a bunch of carriers. And then let's say you get 3 or 4 or 5 rates back. One's $1,500, one's $1,400, one's $1,300, right? And so now you're going to not use the low. You're not going to use the high. You're going to kind of middle and average it out on the lower end a little bit. And then from there, what you're going to do is you're going to add your margin. Say you're going to add $200 in margin, and that's what you're going to quote the shipper. So when you're operating in the spot market, I'm not talking about contract freight. That's very, very different, okay? But if you're operating in the spot market where most brokers operate, okay, especially startups, you definitely have to understand what it's going to cost you to buy a truck from point A to point B. It doesn't matter what you think is fair. It doesn't matter what the carrier thinks is fair. It doesn't matter what the shipper thinks is fair. Here's the reality. This is the mind shift you have to take. Rates are determined by supply and demand. That means how many trucks are there in that market compared to how many loads? If there's more trucks than there are loads, then demand goes down and rates go down because there's more competition from trucks. If there's more loads than there are trucks, then rates go up. So that's what you're figuring out. What is the supply and demand? What is the spot market rate? Okay. So I always give this classic example. When I first started as a freight broker back in 2003, 2004, we used to do a lot of freight between Boston and Chicago. And back then we used to pay a truck, the spot market rate that all brokers paid trucks was typically Boston to Chicago was about $1 a mile, maybe 90 cents a mile. Okay. It was even cheaper. And the reason why is because there was more trucks than there were loads. But if you take that exact same load and you turn around and you ship it from Chicago to Boston, that rate might have been $2 or $2.50 or even $3 a mile because there was more freight than there was trucks. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you guys because it's really supply and demand. It's not how much does the driver cost and how much is maintenance and how much is fuel. I mean, a certain amount of that gets factored in, but the reality is it comes down to supply and demand. So I hope that helps. Devin asks, how do you handle being underquoted by larger brokers and carriers? Well, here's the reality. I'm assuming that you have an existing client that you're doing business with and somebody came in and underquoted you. Well, this is where relationships and trust come in. Okay. So I've had plenty of times in my career where I was working with a shipper for 6 months or a year or more, and we were doing good business. And then somebody comes in and tries to underquote the lane or underbid the lane. And I would tell you the majority of the time, because of my relationship with that client, I was able to retain that client. Either one, I had to make a decision and reevaluate the rate and possibly lower the rate a little bit if possible, or I educated my client, or the relationship was strong enough where them saving 10 or 20 or $50 on a load wasn't, worth the risk of them transitioning over. So the reality is this is where relationships trump transactions. Of course, price is always a variable, But if you have a customer and you're doing good business with them and they trust you and they rely on you and you've really done a good job for them, someone coming in and bidding $5 less or $10 less. Now, if they come in and they're reputable and they can quote $200 or $300 or $400 less, well, then you got a problem, because if they're able to make money at that rate and you're overcharging that amount, then you're at risk. So a lot of it comes down to what are you paying versus what is the margin you're making versus what is the market willing to bear, right? So those are a couple things you need to factor in. But here's what I don't do. I don't chase rate. If my relationship isn't strong enough and I feel as though that if I drop the rate to that point, I'm either not going to make money or it's going to compromise the service, I educate my client and then I put the decision in their hands. Now, if it's a high volume shipper where you've got a lot of lanes, you're doing 10 or 20 or 30 different lanes and it's just one lane, you may decide to lower that rate and use it as a loss leader and just break even or even lose money on that lane in order to keep the other lanes, viable, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. It's a very hard, complex question to answer in a format like this, but I wanted to give you a little bit of the framework that would go through my mind as I evaluated the answer in real time. So hope that helps. AK asks, what are the best ways to check current freight market, like dry van, reefer, flatbed? How can I get to know what is going on in the current market? The best way to understand spot market rates is through load boards, Truck Stop and DAT. Number one, they have rating tools that will give you market intelligence. Number two, they have live carriers that are posting their trucks, and they have live carriers that are calling on posted loads. Number three, they have lane history, meaning if you were to search for flatbeds from Buffalo to Atlanta, you could see a history of trucks that have posted their trucks, the carriers that have posted their trucks over the last 30, 60, 90 days. You can see how many times they've posted their trucks. And if they've posted their trucks regularly, then that would be somebody you would want to call to have a conversation with about building a partnership. Okay, so the load boards and the load board rating tools are probably the tools that are going to give you the most market intelligence and the most bang for your buck. Because again, we're operating in the spot market. So you really need to know, not what is the cheapest truck, not what is the most expensive, but what is the realistic cost that you're going to have to pay if you post a load tomorrow to pick up Buffalo to Atlanta, that you're not going to have to make 100 phone calls in order to cover that load, and that it's a rate that's fair enough that the carrier will pick that load up pretty quick. So I hope that helps. Chandra asks, what is my first step to become a freight broker? My suggestion on becoming a freight broker, your first step should be educating yourself, doing what you're doing now. Get trained, right? Understand the fundamentals of what it takes to become a successful freight broker or freight agent. That's why I put together freightbrokerbootcamp.com back in 2009. It's been like 15 years. We've had over 10,000 students go through that program. So getting trained is the first step. Now, beyond there, that training is typically going to navigate you through the rest of the steps, including getting your bond, getting your authority, setting up your office, learning how to do rating, learning how to use load boards, negotiating, how to get shippers. All of those pieces are going to be a part of the training program, and that will guide you through it. So if you make that your first step, you will typically have the ability to get guided through the entire program. Again, that's why I put together freightbrokerbootcamp.com. We offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee, okay? So you can check it out, kick the tires for 60 days, and if you're not happy, just ask us for a refund. We'll send your money back. All right. Hey, Dennis, right now I'm taking Freight Broker Bootcamp. Tell us, please, what is our next step after finishing bootcamp? All right, so after you finish bootcamp, the online training program, you're going to have to make an important decision. Do you want to become a freight agent or do you want to become a freight broker? Okay, because both of those decisions are covered in the Freight Broker Bootcamp online training program. Once you make that decision, then you're going to want to take the basic steps. If you want to become a freight agent, then at that point, you're going to want to find a freight brokerage that you can work with that will partner with you and contract with you on a contingency basis, right? A commission-only basis. You're going to want to find your niche, right? You're going to want to make a list of leads. You're going to want to figure out how you're going to cold call them. And then at that point, you're going to start getting shippers. Kind of the same thing goes to become a freight agent, but the first step will be obviously you got to get your freight broker authority. You got to set up a TMS, you got to set up a load board, things of that nature. So I go through that in the program. I think you should have the steps that you need, particularly if you go through the quick start training and you're looking to become a freight broker. And so I hope that helps. If you have a more specific question or follow-up, let me know. Any recommendations about how to build credit with carrier factoring companies? Okay, so here's what I would suggest. Hold on, let me see something really quick. Hold on one second. I've got a training here. If you go to, okay, so here's what I would suggest. Hold on one quick second. Let me see if I can find this resource for you. Hold on a second. Okay, hold on. I think I have a resource for you. Okay, so I'm going to put it up on the screen. Okay, so my friend at Operify, who's the CEO of a factoring company, put together a freight broker credit building online training program. He sells that program for $250. But if you go to this link, freightbrokerbootcamp.com/broker credit, you get it 100% free. Now, he's a guy that specializes in understanding freight broker credit, factoring, and trucking, okay, when it comes to the financial management side. And he has some amazing, I went through the training myself. I actually went through the training. I vetted it. I looked at it. It's a great training. That's what I would highly recommend. You could check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com/broker credit. And he walks you through step by step by step how you as a new freight broker can build your credit, start doing business with other factoring companies, start building your own credit, and eventually not need a factoring company where you would be able to do it on your own. So that's what I would highly recommend. It's a great question. Arthur asks, what about loads that pay nothing? Should we just cover them to get experience? Well, if they don't pay you anything, you're going to lose a lot of money. You mean if they don't make, should you cover loads that don't make a profit? Well, that really depends on your risk tolerance and your willingness to lose money on a load, right? Because if you've got very slim margins, let's say, for example, you're just breaking even and you take a load, there might be a day when you might have to lose 50 or 100 or a couple $100 to cover that load. So it depends on your risk tolerance. But learning how to move the freight for smaller profit makes sense to me, right? When you first get started. So maybe you're only making 50 or $100 a load when you first get started, right? But you're learning, first of all, you're developing a relationship with a shipper because you're moving their loads and you're doing it as they've requested, right? And you're doing a great job. You're building carrier relationships. You're building your credit, right? You're building your experience. So yeah, I think moving freight at a lower margin when you first get started has benefits. Now, again, if you want to not make any money on it or lose money, that really is a judgment call on your part. But I think it makes sense because of all those reasons I just explained. Hope that helps. Question from Aram. Dennis, how do I break the ice? I'm at a point where I have a few customers I do business with, but I'm stuck at that point. I can't get more to increase my volumes. How do you break the ice? Okay, so here's how you break the ice. You have to sound different. You have to be different. You can't sound like everybody else. Otherwise, they're going to treat you like a freight jockey. They're going to treat you like a salesperson, and they're going to give you the Heisman. And then you're going to get that rejection in the first 5 or 10 seconds. And then that's what everybody hates, right? So the key is you got to be different. The way to do that is this. The most successful freight brokers are not the freight brokers who make 200 or 300 dials a day, okay? Where they focus on quantity over quality. The most successful freight brokers focus on quality over quantity. Now it's a balancing act. You can't make 5 calls a day and expect to build your funnel of shippers, right? So you still have to do 40, 50, 60, 70, 40 to 60 calls a day. But the key is, rather than just taking a random list of shippers and smiling and dialing and asking dumb questions with a dumb script, you better off educating yourself about those 40, 50, 60 prospects, looking at their website, understanding their product, understanding a little bit about what's going on in their industry, looking at the shipping manager, logistics manager's LinkedIn profile, right? Understanding and educating yourself about that prospect is going to give you the data. It's going to give you the sales intelligence to figure out a way to stand out from the crowd and be different, right? And it's different for everybody. Let me give you an example of one way that I did it a long time ago. The first customer I ever got using LinkedIn. I'll tell you the story. You might have heard it before. Forgive me if you have. So I'm not sure what year it was. It was probably 2007, 2008. LinkedIn was very early on. Again, that's 15 years ago plus. So I was on LinkedIn and I didn't know what I was doing. I sent a connection request out to a guy in Philadelphia. He accepted the connection request, and the connection request said something to the effect of talking about the rivalry between the Buffalo Bills and the Philadelphia Eagles. Football. We were talking football, right? So I didn't know what to do, but I knew this guy was in Philadelphia. I knew I was in Buffalo. And of course, there's a rivalry in the NFL, and everybody's home team is their favorite team. So I figured it'd be something interesting to try. The next thing I know, he responded back, and we started messaging back and forth about the rivalry between the Bills and the Eagles. And I said to him, hey, listen, I'm sick of typing. Let's jump on a quick call. Boom, we jump on a call. We were talking a little bit about football. It was about a 15-minute call. 13 of those minutes, I just listened and let him talk about himself. I talked a little bit about football. I talked about, how he got his job, talked about his family, things of that nature. And at the end, he's like, so Dennis, you started this freight brokerage. Tell me a little bit about it. And I just did a super quick 30-second infomercial, said, hey, you're aware of XYZ company. Yeah, they're a competitor of ours. Well, we've been working with them to help them fix A, B, and C. And here's how it's worked out. And that's what we do. He goes, so you're a freight broker? I said, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we do. He goes, well, that's great. He goes, maybe we'll have something down the road. And I said, listen, would it be okay if I followed up with you? I think he was going to be going on vacation, or he was tied up. Would it be okay if I followed up with you shortly down the road? And he's like, yeah. And one thing led to another. He ended up becoming a client of mine and ultimately doing hundreds of thousands of dollars in business with him. I think it was probably somewhere in the range of around $600,000 in business with us. He wasn't a big shipper, but he was a good shipper. We had him for many, many years. And so that's an example of how I was able to break the ice. But the reason why it worked is because I didn't sound like everybody else. Now, are you going to be able to use that exact playbook? No. But what I found is I found something that was important to him, and I started a dialogue that wasn't salesy. That's one way to go about it. Okay. That's one approach that you can use. Now, there's lots of different ways you can do this, but the point is you have to find what's important to them, not sound like a salesperson, be compelling, and you'll have an opportunity. So I hope that helps. And again, for those of you that are struggling to get shippers, if you're not on the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator waitlist, I'm going to tell you right now, you're a fool. Okay. That's an 8-week live coaching program where I teach you exactly what you need to do in order to stand out from the crowd. I teach you how to follow up like a pro. I teach you how to overcome all the common objections. I teach you how to close. I teach you how to leverage LinkedIn, email, and phone, and face-to-face, and a whole lot more, right? But you got to be on the wait list in order to be in the game, right? It costs you nothing to get on the wait list. The coaching program is not free. The coaching program is not cheap. But the fact is, I have clients that have sent me feedback saying they got a 50x return on their investment. You can't ask for much more than that. So I hope that helps. Get on the wait list. What time is it? All right. So we got a few more minutes. I'm scrolling. Give me a minute. Okay, as a new freight broker agent focusing primarily on full truckload, what are some good sources to use to have a better insight on full truckload trends when talking to potential shippers? Well, the number one trend that you're going to want to know is the supply and demand of trucks, right? Are there more trucks than loads? There are more loads than trucks. The other thing you're going to want to understand is what is the dynamic with fuel? Is fuel going up? Is fuel going down? Is it stable? Right? So those are a couple things you're going to want to know. And the best place to do that is probably the load boards, right? DAT, Truck Stop, Direct Freight, others, right? There's lots of load boards out there. Secondly, there are other sources of information about logistics as a whole, but I'm a big believer in niching down. And so if you're in the steel industry, I would focus on trends and news and information in and around the steel industry rather than just the logistics industry as a whole. Okay. So I like to niche down. So whatever your niche is, produce or oil and gas or full truckload or whatever your niche is, right? You want to kind of niche down into that. So if yours is full truckload, then you're going to obviously want to have a lot of rating data. You're going to want to have data that, talks about, the number of drivers, right? Trucks, new truck sales, right? Used truck sales, things of that nature. So that sort of data has a tendency to be, what they call trailing indicators. They're not necessarily leading indicators, but I wouldn't get too bogged down with a lot of data. I would focus in more specifically on your niche and what are some reputable sources within that niche for information that you can use to educate yourself, to help educate your customers, and to help to position yourself as a kind of a thought leader and an expert in that niche. So I hope that helps. Okay, Arthur says, I found a new shipper finally, but I can't get carriers to cover the loads. Well, I'll bet that rather than you quoting the lane to them, they gave you the price for the lane and you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? So did you do the research before you started accepting the loads to know what the spot market rate was and then add your margin on top? Or did they give you some rate that they wanted you to hit, right? And so whenever I was a broker, right, if a shipper gave me a rate, well, we've got a load, we got a lane from Buffalo to Atlanta for flatbeds and, we pay $1,500. And I would say, okay, great. Well, listen, let me do some research. Let me look at how our carriers line up and I'll come back to you with a quote. I'll do my best to try to hit that target rate. But here's the reality. Just so you know, I am rarely, if ever, the cheapest. If that's your number one concern, then I'm probably not your guy. Okay. But if you want to understand why my shippers are willing to pay me a little bit more, I'll be happy to explain that to you. Right. And then I go out and do an independent research and I find out that I can cover that load for $1,650 and I'm going to make $200 on that load, right? Or maybe $150 on that load. I'm going to have to pay whatever they were willing to pay a carrier. They're only going to pay me. So that's how I would handle that situation. So if you're not able to make money on a load, then you've got to make a determination. How much money are you willing to lose in order to get your foot in the door with that shipper if you're willing to lose any at all? This kind of goes back to the question you asked before, which is it okay to make little or no money on a load in order to learn? And I already answered that question, so I hope that helps. Okay, Nova's asked, I want to be a car hauler agent and I'm interested about how to get leads in this niche. Well, there's two ways. If you're dealing with a consumer market like snowbirds or military, where people are relocating, right? Snowbirds, they live in New York, but they spend their winter in Florida, right? And they need a car moved down and a car moved back. That's a difficult market. Typically what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do some sort of advertising, whether that be Google, or you're going to have to work with some service provider that focuses on developing leads, or maybe there's a load board that's specific to that. Now, if you're dealing with more car hauling on a commercial level where you're dealing with auctions, you're dealing with car dealerships, you're dealing with, repossession, things of that nature, well, then that might be a little bit different, right? So at that point, you're probably going to be calling on those commercial businesses and then, offering to provide a solution based upon the pain or needs that they have, right? Just like any other commercial. So those are the two different ways. If you're dealing on the consumer market, it's a lot more challenging because you've got to advertise, or you got to work with somebody who knows how to advertise and generate leads, inbound leads, and then you pay for each one of those leads. But it's not nearly as easy as it sounds, right? Because they're not just giving you those leads, they're giving those to 10 other car haulers, and you're competing with all those people, right? Or on the commercial side, if you're dealing with auctions and small, car dealerships and things of that nature, where you're going to be hauling multiple cars for a business, then that's much more of a B2B sales process, which is more how real freight brokerage happens. I'm not a big fan of the car hauling niche, particularly on the consumer side. On the commercial side, it's something that I would entertain, but on the consumer side, I'll just be extremely honest with you. I wouldn't waste my time. That's just my personal, I know people that make money doing it. I know a lot of people like it, but to me, it's a waste of time. You can't build a recurring revenue stream, because that shipper that customer, that consumer you're dealing with, you're going to move one load for them and you may never hear from them again. Whereas if it's a commercial, say it's an auction or a car dealer, you might move a load a day. So the lifetime value of that client is exponentially more than the lifetime value of that snowbird. Hope that helps. Yeah, this is where you need to build credit. This is where you need to use that credit course. Okay. So if you're struggling with building credit and you don't have credit on Insonia, factoring companies won't give you credit or won't extend credit to you, go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/broker credit. You will get access to that freight broker credit building course for free. It's $250 value. The only way you can get it for free is to go freightbrokerbootcamp.com/broker credit. So if you have credit issues or credit questions, that is the best resource to go to. Oh, I'm glad you asked this question, Joffrey. Hi, Dennis, a new broker. Should I be looking to get shippers off the load boards? The answer is no. Matter of fact, the answer is hell no. Here's why. Load boards are designed for brokers and carriers to collaborate, right? And to work together in a partnership to service your shippers, right? They post their trucks, you post their loads, you make a match. It's a marriage. You move that load, everybody makes money, right? And your customer's happy because their freight gets picked up and delivered on time, and delivered with no damage or issues, right? So if there are shipper load boards out there, right? There are some load boards out there that accept shippers, and there are shippers that put their loads on these load boards. Here's what I have found. I have never, ever, ever found a broker that has built a successful brokerage or agency by getting shippers from a load board. In how many years? 20 plus years in the brokerage industry, never saw a broker or an agent build a successful business that way. Might you get a load here or there? Here's the problem. If they're posting their loads to the load boards, they're focused exclusively on price, and you don't want to deal with them anyway because you're not going to make any money. Okay? So trust me when I tell you, load boards are not for getting shippers. Load boards are for getting carriers. If you want to get shippers, you need to learn how to sell. You need to learn how to cold call. You need to learn how to cold email. You need to learn how to, use LinkedIn. You need to learn how to use B2B sales tools and strategies in order to stand out from the crowd, build rapport, identify a need, fill that need, and then have a customer that can be worth millions of dollars in the lifetime value of that client. I was just on the phone with a friend of mine who's also a longtime client, or a client of mine, and I asked him, I said, what's the lifetime value of one of your shippers? He goes, well, he'd never really thought about it that way. What's the lifetime value? Because most people don't. And I said, well, what'd you do in revenue last month? He goes, X. And I go, how many different shippers did that comprise of? And he said, well, it's Y. And I said, so your average shipper is worth $500,000, okay, a month. Okay. So that's what he does per month. Now he's an agent, not a broker. So his average shipper is worth $500,000 a month. That's $6 million a year. Okay. So when you look at that, when you think about the lifetime value, right, of a shipper, that's the secret to this, right? It's not about getting one load here, one load here. It's really about finding shippers that are looking for a real partnership or looking for real value and not just price shopping on every single load and trying to beat you down into the dirt on every single load. And that's what I found from shippers that post to load boards. And again, to this day, I have never found a broker that has built a successful business that way. And if you want to dispute that, hit me up in the comments and show me how you did it and tell me what your numbers are. And we can have a chat, but I highly doubt you're going to show up. Okay. So I hope that helps. Mirad asked, do you think 2025 is going to be a better going to have better rates than 2024? Well, it depends on what you mean by better. If you mean higher as being better, higher is not always better. See, this is the thing that people don't understand. As a freight broker, you make your money in the middle. So when rates go up, you make the middle. When rates go down, you make the middle. You just have to understand which direction rates are going. But the reality is, here's what you have to understand, is that you should be able to make that middle. And yeah, margins might get squeezed a little bit, but once they stable out, you can expand on those back into those margins. Typically, as a broker, you're going to make somewhere between 10 and 20% of the total value of the load. If the load is $3,000 to the shipper, you're going to probably make somewhere between $300 and $600 on that load, depending upon that shipper. When things are more competitive, maybe you're on the 10 to 12, 14% range. When demand is higher, then you might make a little bit more. So to dive a little bit further into your question, I believe that just based on the recent election and the recent economic trends, that things are going to start to pick back up. Are they going to look like 2021, 22? No. That was an anomaly, just so you know. That was a freight boom that you may never see again. But here's the thing about freight. It goes up, it goes down. It goes up, it goes down. Every market does that. I don't care if you're in the tech market. I don't care if you're in the oil and gas industry. I don't care if you're in what industry you're in. Markets go up, markets go down. They cycle. And so what you have to understand is you have to learn how to make money not only when markets are rising, but when markets are declining. And that's the secret to building a successful and highly profitable and highly sustainable freight brokerage. So I hope that helps. If I have a trucking business, can I be a freight broker for my business? Well, you can if you get your freight broker authority. Trucking companies have the ability to operate vehicles as an asset-based trucking company. Brokers have the ability to operate as a broker, but the same way as a broker can't operate as a carrier can't operate as a broker unless you have the proper authority. Okay. So if you get your freight broker authority, yes, you can have your broker authority and your carrier authority. So you can operate as both, but you have to have that. You can't just have a trucking company and be and broker loads to other carriers. It's illegal. Okay. All right, guys, I know you got a bunch more questions. Let me try one more and then we're going to wrap it up for today. Hold on a second. Let me find a good question here. Give me 1 second. I'm reviewing the questions here. Renee, use that credit building course that I explained to you. Join that free credit building course. If you're struggling with factoring companies extending you credit, use that credit building course. It will teach you how to get credit with factoring companies. Okay. And it's not always what you think. Doing quick pays isn't always the secret to building your credit fast. And he goes into a lot of detail in the training about that and how to make sure you're building your credit. Okay. So that would be what I would suggest. Listen, if I didn't get to your question today, I apologize. I'm going to wrap it up. I said I was only going to stay for 30 minutes, but I'm already almost an hour in. So listen, if you're curious about becoming a freight broker or a freight agent, okay, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. That's my freight broker startup program. Trained over 10,000 students, and we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. I can't make it any easier than that. If you're already a freight broker or you're already a freight agent and you're struggling with how to get shippers, you're struggling with freight broker sales, a lot of questions that we had today were about how to get shippers, how to get sales, how to be different. You're definitely going to want to check out my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. Again, it's closed right now. It's sold out. But if you get on the wait list, you'll be the first to get notified. Sometimes, I might have spots that open up next week, 2 weeks from now. But if you're not on the wait list, you're not going to know. So you got to get on the wait list. Again, the program is not free. It's not cheap, but it's worth exponentially more than the investment. And I've got tons of testimonials to that will stand up for that. So listen. Thank you for being here. Hope you guys enjoyed the training. If you did, hit the like button. If I answered your question, hit the like button. If you learned anything from this training, hit the like button. If you like these Q&As where I go into specific questions, hit me up in the comments 1 to 10. 1, Dennis, I don't like these Q&As. I would prefer a specific training. Or 10, meaning I love these Q&As. I love being able to spend that extra time on questions. And give me some feedback so I know about it. Should I do these? Should I continue to do these types of Ask Me Anything sessions? I hope you guys have an awesome day, have an awesome week, and we'll see you next Monday on the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. Thanks all.